just want to remind everyone that this is a safe space and we're here to listen and we're here to approach these conversations from a place of empathy and love. And so, of course, there are going to be things that are emotional. A lot of these stories are extremely personal for these students. So let's take a moment to, like, as we listen, ask ourselves, are we listening from a place of defensiveness or dismissiveness, or a place of empathy and love and with an open heart? So as I'm sure a lot of you are there already, but as we move forward, let's just remind ourselves that all of these stories are personal stories, they're valid, and that we need to approach these conversations from a place of empathy.
We fight for pretty much being able to see that there's a problem not only with students, but with teachers. And if you see the problems with students, a lot of times you think, well, what's going on at home? Because a lot of times racism is taught. So if they're seeing it and they're portraying it and they're being very disrespectful to other kids that are different than them, hair texture-wise, race-wise, no matter what, you think about, well, what has those kids been exposed to? You think about the media, you think about the parents. And a lot of times that we don't give our kids an open view of what perception is and what other cultures go through. And I didn't learn that till college. I didn't understand perception till college. I didn't get that people go through different things, and I thought it was just like, oh, it's just black people. We just go through it, it's fine. But when you learn about why people don't understand, like Brentwood, being a town that isn't primarily like mixed. You'll see a couple of people here and there, but you don't, and you already know the way the media is portraying it, the way TV shows portray it, the way Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, the way you see these kids, they never look like how actual kids are. So people see that on TV, especially kids, because it's something they learn, and they think, oh, all Mexicans are that way, all black people are that way, and that's sadly not true. And so it's about teaching your kids and teaching each other that don't judge somebody about how they look. Judge them about who they are as a person. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
So we can implement and amend changes right here. And it all starts with a conversation. It starts with us wanting to make the change and going as hard as we possibly can at the school board meeting to let them know about our concerns. So we're going to get started shortly.
So one of the questions is, and this is like a question we posed to our community, it's a question that Ariel asked in her letter in the East Bay Times, and that is, how has my proximity to whiteness affected the ways I prioritize talking about racial issues? And so I don't know if there was anything that any of the panelists had, or we had to.
You want to start that out, Mr. Russ?
All right, so my proximity to whiteness is obvious, I think, to everyone if you look at me. You know, I something I have to own up to and acknowledge as an educator when I talk about issues regarding race and history. I'm a socialist teacher. I teach U.S. history primarily, and obviously in my curriculum, race comes up frequently, and I don't ignore it. I try to not only acknowledge my proximity to whiteness, but also ask the students to be a part of it and to be a part of our safe space together, to acknowledge that we do need to be aware of privilege, of bias, and I am not immune to that, right? I am not excluded from that. And that when we talk about issues of race in the classroom, my proximity to whiteness is something that I need to acknowledge and be upfront about. And the more upfront about it I am, the more honest my students and our discussions can become.
A lot of times when conversations on race or blackness are had, the extent of the conversation the end is often that you've learned that black people were once slaves, or you've learned that black people had to go through Jim Crow. And I feel that most times, in fact, I can't think of a single time in my educational career where this has happened, but I think the end goal of those conversations should not be to know the pain and trauma that black people have gone through. Of course, that's important. But the end goal should be to have empathy and to understand how these problems have caused so many institutional issues within our society that are present and persist to this very day. Slavery was a long time ago, but its effects are long-lasting.
Do
it's just not tied to data. And so one of the liabilities, I think, is that if we focus on these issues, it's not assessed, we're not reporting it, and so we take away, quote unquote, from something else that we might deem more important. I do feel like the Brentwood Union School District values their students and values their staff, and would never tell a staff member, no, you can't teach that. I've never experienced that in my time with the district. I think we don't know what to teach and where to put it in. And it goes beyond a cultural doll that we're going to trace and draw your country of origin's flag on it and put it up in the multi-purpose room so we can all celebrate how we're from different backgrounds. Of course we want to celebrate that, but that's one thing. And we don't do it all the time because it takes away from other things that we think are more important. And we need to shift our thinking and remember that this is important, and that our job as educators, yes, is to teach kids how to multiply fractions, but I'm much more concerned that my students become productive, contributing members to society and are good people. If they happen to be able to multiply fractions on top of that, cool, but that's the biggest thing, is are you gonna walk out if you're a good person? That's much more important.
Now, the heartbeat of racism is denial. I'm gonna say that again. The heartbeat of racism is denial. And so, in order for you to be anti-racist, you must first confess that I have a little racism in me. All of us have to go ahead and do some self-reflection. When Jesus was sitting down at the Last Supper table and he's looking at his disciples and he says, a traitor is right here among you. The disciples didn't look at each other. They said, Lord, is it I? In other words, we all have a little Judas in us. There's a little bit of racism in us. And if we continue to deny it, we will let this system continue to flow and flow and flow. So quickly, I want to talk about the state of African Americans in the schools, okay? Everything these brothers said. Now, before I move on, this brother right here, I went to this brother's house. He's not going to brag on himself, but the brother had a 4.7, and he's on his way to Yale, single parent home. Y'all got to, if that's not black excellence. So what we have to do, here's what we have to do. Now, this is critical. If you want true systemic change, we have to start looking at systems of racism. We have to get past the substance. We have to see who's in power, who's making the decisions, why they're making the decisions, and we need to go and we need to vote. We need to find out what's going on, and we need to start asking the right questions. If we don't understand how racism works, we're going to ask the wrong questions and we're going to get the wrong results. So here's what we need to do. Brentwood, if you're listening to me, holla if you hear me. If you hear me, just say amen when you can. Amen? All right. Listen, you have to start voting, start reading books that are going to challenge who you are, start looking at how racism operates, look at the racial hierarchy in this country. Why is it this way? What can I do to fix it? The protests are good. Stokely Carmichael once said, and I'll close with this, he talked about the difference between mobilization and organization. What we do is we mobilize over issues. And you know what? When we mobilize over issues, it brings about reform. But we're at a point where we need more than just a reform, but revolution. Revolution. And revolution is not always pretty, because you're talking about breaking up systematic, historic systematic systems of favor for one group and not for the other group. What are you willing to give up? Who are you willing to have next to you? Who are you willing to live next to you or go to school with your kids? Now we're talking something real, okay? And so if we're willing to look at that and start going from mobilization to organization, and we start organizing programs and systems, because I said, this is great. And the first thing I told Ariel is, what's the next step? How are you going to organize for systematic, long-term change? And once you get to that point, then you'll start to see racism slowly eradicate. Now, critical race theory says racism is a part of America. It's just as American as apple pie. It is what it is. We can't erase it. But what we can do for the Joshua generation, I'm talking to the generation, not the Moses generation, but the generation that's ready to cross. For that generation, if you want to live in a society where racism is not the prevalent issue, then it takes you reading, it takes you writing, it takes you organizing, and it takes you speaking truth to power. Thank you. God bless you. Dr. Lamont Francies.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Again, there is a Zoom meeting this Saturday where we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but we hope that this conversation doesn't stop here or at this next Zoom meeting. There's so many conversations to be had regarding race, both in and outside the classroom, things we need to talk about, anti-Blackness, roots of white supremacy, history. This is something that's a lifelong journey and lifelong work, and I hope that we're all committed to doing that work.